I was an exterminator and my last job has driven me to early retirement. That pretty much sums up this story. Have you ever seen those shows where they send in people in hazmat suits to clean up crap-piled mountains of hoarding garbage? Yeah, well, that was me. On top of cleaning homes, I had the lovely job of exterminating the swarms of pests that thrive in those conditions. I've seen things you wouldn't imagine. Bathtubs filled with roaches, living and dead layered on top of each other like a crunchy, crawling lasagna. Oh, and there was this one time where me and my partner Phil went into a house with, and I quote, a small rat problem. Let me tell you, there was nothing small about them. They were like rats on roids. Phil even joked he swore he saw one with a teardrop tattoo and a switchblade. I digress. The reason I'm telling you all this is so that you understand. So you can tell that I'm just an average Joe. Literally, my name is Joe, and I'm sane. Straight shooting, working class bloke. And that's important, you see, for what I'm about to tell you, well, it will make you question the validity of my writing. But I swear to you, this is the honest truth. After a week ago, we got a call for a job just outside of Kansas. It was a little farmstead with the owner complaining about a vermin problem. Rats, no problem, I thought when Phil told me. I mean, having dealt with cat-sized roid rats, I was sure I could handle whatever pests were running amok on a farm. Besides, Phil had assured me this was going to be an easy job. I had no reason to think he'd be wrong. So, we went out to the home of the woman who called, Mrs. Cattlewell. Across the arid waste we drove, and upon driving up the dirt road, I could see it, a little farm with a crooked, cruelly crafted windmill spinning slowly beside it. The place was quaint, like a dream of yesteryears that never were. It was the sort of place one would imagine as a backdrop to a black and white western, where troubles melted like lemon drops of twisters delivered you so far off the strange new worlds. However, there was also something off about the place. From its fields of dried yellow grass and barren soil to the enormous barn, its red painted faded and its interior empty of animals, the cogs began to spin in my head. I found myself wondering, what kind of farm is this? If it doesn't have any animals or crops. Still, maybe they used to run it as a farm, but have retired it since, I told myself. Yeah, that seemed logical to me. Maybe they ran it and have since gotten too old and let it slip to despair. It happens. When we parked the van up, I looked at the home ahead. It was teetering, two-floored structure. A gnarled, cruelly constructed wooden homestead made of uneven planks and entirely stripped of its exterior painting, probably from a lifetime of battering by the harsh sand-filled winds. You're not one of them salesmen, or with those who keep trying to take my home, a shrewd elderly voice squeaked from the shadows of her porch. No, madame. We're from Squeaky Clean, the pest control and house cleaning service, Phil said, stepping his portly body up the porch, his large workman boots causing it to squeak as he did. Oh, of course you are. And may I say you seem like a sweet young man? Are you here to deal with the vermin? She shrilled, old lady asked, her toothless, wrinkled mouth grinning at Phil. I followed in Phil's wake and looked at the shrewd little old woman, all wrinkled up and wrapped in layers of knitted fabric. Yeah, that's right. We came because of the rodent problem you've been having, I assured her, looking at her with her small black glasses pressed into her face like goggles and the layers of knitted shrouds wrapped around her. I wonder if she was all there. Oh, there seems to be no end to them. They are everywhere these days, but lately they've been scampering in and out of my house as if they own it. They're always coming on my property, touching my things, squeaking away. I put down traps, but still, they keep coming, trying to force me out, Mrs. Caldwell explained, her strange rambling words bringing a smile to both mine and Phil's face. We're accustomed to the normal dementia-dented declarations of more than friendly clientele, but the idea of some rat conspiracy was a new one. You couldn't do me a favor, could you, young man? Could you also check on the flies? Mrs. Kidwell asked. Her voice interrupted my daydreams of William Wallace-styled rat rebellions. The flies, I shivered, having gotten flashbacks to the awful squat that we had to clean a couple years back. No problem, Mrs. Kidwell. We'll swat those flies and round up those rodents for you and have your home sparkling in no time. Phil chuckled in a charming corporate way. I'm too long in the tooth for you to patronize me, young man, she announced, her calm and gentle manner slipping for a moment. Phil and I gave each other the she's a spanner short of a toolbox look as we cautiously planned our next phase of replies. Anyway, I'll leave you boys to it. I'm going into town to run some errands, but feel free to help yourself to what's in the pantry, the little woman said as she shuffled her way towards a dusty, beat-up old banger parked on her dirt road drive. Oh, and one more thing. My son is sleeping in his room. He is not to be disturbed. Okay, Mrs. Kidwell. I chimed back as we began our journey into the house. That means don't enter his room. He gets very crossed when this happens, she insisted, her words serious and stern like a teacher chastising a pupil. We promise, Phil replied, trying his best not to annoy the feisty little woman anymore. Then in a hell of poisonous gas, the woman drove off. We could still hear the cracks of her car engine sputtering in the distance as we clad ourselves in gear and masked up. Then we did it. We peeled back the screen door and entered the old woman's parlor. It was as bad as you can imagine. Cobwebs don't just hang from the ceiling. They were particularly part of it. The white strands from strewn across the room knitting themselves together with the old wooden furniture and the rat-bitten couch. The dust, heavy air was scented with the smell of stale winds and total neglect. But the kitchen was far worse. Upon stepping into the wrecked room, we saw a wide breach in the floor, a plunge into the dark basement below. The counters were caked in layers of grime, and the fridge, my God, that fridge. We opened it, and out fell Niagara Falls of maggots and other worming white things, wiggling in unison and undulating into the cracks between the floorboards. And you thought the job was going to be easy, I sneered, giving Phil a playful nudge. Yeah, don't you love our job, Phil said. Suddenly our laughter was startled by the sound of hurried feet scuttling through the wood above us. The pitter-patter of tiny feet was something we were familiar with, having been in plenty of rat-infested hovels. I'll deal with our furry-footed friends upstairs, and you can handle all this, I said as I turned to leave. Oh, you are so kind, Phil said, shaking his head. Exiting the kitchen, I began climbing up the termite-chewed steps, trying my best not to put too much weight on them. Least I fall straight through and end up in some godforsaken rat's nest. Tap, 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 tap. Drummed the verminous sound around the house. These tones are a little off from the usual bouncy bounding of rats. However, rats were the least of my concern once I placed my foot upon the top step. As I did, it hit me, the noxious odor. Earthy yet sour, like soil from a field watered with curdled milk. It was a pungent perfume of death. I knew it well. When you've cleaned up as many scenes of death and murder, you get accustomed to the bitter rot that spills from the dead. Yet you never get over the dread. I feared what might be waiting upstairs for me, knowing what that smell meant. With slow and cautious steps, I followed it until I came to a room at the far end of the creaky, crumbling hallway. I was sure this was where the smell was coming from, and solidating this assumption was a sound buzzing behind the wooden membrane. The door before me vibrated with the wing beat of an infestial swarm. Now, with the smell and flies, my mind was quick to race towards the idea that I was about to step into a crime scene. I mean, that lady wasn't all here to begin with. Maybe she snapped and killed her son. Or maybe he died of natural causes and she couldn't bear to part with his body. That theory filled me with revulsion and despair. I was used to cleaning up after the dead, but seeing one, especially a child, that thought chilled me to my bones. Still, I had to do a job, and Phil would love for me to chicken out so he can joke and howl at my expense. Readying my spray in hand and mustering up the courage to enter, I rushed in, slamming the door shut behind me. All was black. Even the light from outside was eclipsed by the black bodies buzzing upon the panes of glass. My visors were completely coated in them, and so with no eyes to see, I unleashed the nauseous spray into the air, sending the swarm into a futile, frenzied flight. On I sprayed until their numbers began to die down. It didn't take long before they fell, and through there was still a lot of them struggling on. I could finally wipe my visor clean and see the room. To my surprise, there was nothing out of place. I mean, it was an empty room, no clutter or hoard, no expired food or rotten corpse, as I had imagined. Relief washed over me. But then I heard it, the scuttling. This time, the tapping ran up the wall to the right, drumming an accurate beat as it did. A shiver ran up my spine upon hearing the sound. No amount of experience in this kind of job can ever cure you of the fear of spiders. I mean, they're spiders, creepy 8-legged hairy things that crawl into every tiny crevice or hole available. The idea freaks me out more than the thought of coming upon the body of a dead kid. I dread to see how big these spiders are in here. I mean, they've got no shortage of food. I joked to myself. I often found that talking to myself helped me forget the fear of the little critters. But it didn't this time. As the heavy heaps of 8 feet clattered back down the wall, with trembling hands, I tried to just get on with my job. I laid down the flypaper, particularly wallpaper in the room with it, to get any surviving flies. And as I was placing one sheet down, my eyes caught a glimpse of a strange string. Trailing down the wall was a brown leaking of something. It was behind a torn piece of wallpaper. It was clear the string was larger than what I could see. I realized I'd missed it upon my first glance, because most of it was hidden behind the wallpaper of pink flowers, which adorned the room. Something in me told me to peel the paper back. I know I shouldn't have, but once I began, I couldn't stop. With one final tear, the paper fell, and before my eyes, inches from my face, was a large circular blob of browning splatter. I touched the wall. It was moist. So moist my fingers almost spilled through it. Then it struck me again, a gust of foul, festering fumes. There was certainly something rotten. Perhaps there was a body, and I was simply in the wrong room. I thought, despite my instincts telling me something was off, I elected to enter the room next door. Once I left the swarming spare room, I walked towards the adjacent room, and upon that door, there was a phrase, "Henry's room," engraved into the wood. My mind returned to Miss Kittlesworth's only request, and though a part of me should have been concerned with keeping it, I was more worried about that her request was made so we would not discover the corpse of her son. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and let the door open. To my utter shock, what lay before me was the room of a small boy. Drawings adorned the walls, and there were boxes of action figures and a ceiling dotted with glow-in-the-dark stars. However, there was a problem, one irregularity in sight. Every inch, every shelf, wooden furnishing was tied together, knotted in a cascade of greenish-brown webbing. This web was unlike any spider I had ever seen. It wasn't even like the cobwebs from downstairs. It was thick, mucus, like it clung to everything, forming strange slime structures and weird worming nests. Entering, I began yanking some of the sticky stuff down, but it was pulling plaster from the ceiling and walls, so I stopped and prepared to use my spray. Maybe that would loosen the threads, I thought. It was around this time that I noticed that atop of a set of drawers were a series of photographs, something looking to black and white kind of pictures. I saw Mrs. Kidwell, still old and wrinkled, but with her was a small curly-haired boy. He looked no older than 11 in every picture, and was always cuddled up to her, shrouded in throws or sheets. There were old photos. Something about the way every part of the boy was wrapped up in a quilt in every photo frame, it struck me as peculiar. But then again, looking around the chamber of gangrenous webs, those photos were the least strange thing about the house. The penny dropped, and most obvious, the most striking thing imaginable finally drawn upon me. Mrs. Kidwell was adamant that this room contained her son, and though he was held in the picture frames, I saw no sign of a boy. Among the repulsive entanglement of slime threads, I readied my spray and began unleashing its toxic torrent in the room. Pouring forth, the spray cut through the threads, causing them to sizzle and fall, spilling into puddles of puke-colored gunk. Scuttling, suddenly ricocheted across the room, a frightening scamper. I thought from a spider that was soon to snuff it. In my naive and arrogance, I continued my fumigating, chasing the rattling vermin as it raced away from the bug-repellent chemicals spraying beneath the boy's bed. I struck whatever it was, causing the thing to unleash a screech. Never in my worst or weirdest nightmares have I ever heard a sound like it. A bitter, biting well of sound that roared like a cougar and hissed like a diamondback. Stunned my nose, I stopped spraying, giving the creature the opportunity it needed, scrambling behind the wardrobe, its legs skittering up the wood, knocking the wardrobe down as it rambled up its back. Fractured, rotten strands and the cloud of dust filled the room. But when the debris cleared, I saw that behind the wardrobe was a great gaping hole. What kind of spider was that, I fret? It had to be a rat, surely, I told myself. Only something big could have knocked that wardrobe over, but then it wasn't a spider. What had created the vile vines of silky silk which infested the room? Come on, you've got a job to do. It's just a bug. You've dealt with bugs before, I said, trying to psych myself up, but it wasn't working. Trembling, I picked up my spray and stepped through the man-sized cavity in the wall, carrying in with me my heavy canister. Cautiously, I walked through dizzling, twisted interior of the walls, trying not to slip or miss a sheer drop down. Like Henry's room, the space between was thick with otherworldly, grotesque go-mazzer. Slowly I trudged, weaving between the sticky strands until that smell, the disgusting reek, hit me once more. It was stronger in here. It was all I could smell. Every breath I took was a lungful of pestilent perfume. I had time to worry about choking on the stench, for something had caught my eyes. In the webs ahead, I found something out of place. A card from a realtor. Besides, it hung another card. This time it was from a law firm. And next to that, a card from another real estate agent. Looking around, these cards littered the place. Not just law firms or real estate agents either. Plumbers, babysitters, and even pest control. Strange that there should be so many. Strange still that they would be held between the walls. Then I saw them, clinging to sickly strands entombed, particularly cocooned in greenish brown. Their bodies, dozens. Horrific gasp left my mouth. Realtors, salesmen, and lawyer types, still wearing their fancy suits. They were strung up like parcels of gloop. They were rotten, dissolving into a soup of themselves, dripping and seeping into every fiber and splinter. They were the smell. The brown stuff on the wall, that was them melting away, rotting between the crooked panels and thin drywall. I let out a howl, bellowing out for Phil, but that moment I did, I heard it, the cracking of joints, the moving of many legs. To my horror, my eyes caught a glimpse of something. Atop of one of the maggot-crawling corpses appeared a shape, lunging forth. The ghastly spider slashed through the air with biting fangs and clawing legs. I ducked and ran, swiftly swerving through the webbing, evading each clawing sweep from the spider's arms. Listening as I ran, all I could hear was the urgent and hungry skimpering of the spider's legs, bounding from wall to wall, closing in on me with each step. In the darkness, it was hard to see, but I knew that thing was far too large to be a normal spider. It was something else, something monstrous. Those webs were spun from otherworldly material, and the murderous hunger that drove this thing had to come from some eldritch realm, far from our farmish thoughts. I dared not dream from whence I crawled, only focusing on the path ahead as I sprinted on. Pounding out from the murk of the wall cavity, I stumbled back and watched as leg by leg it emerged from the hole. With a sinister slowness, it crept out of the shadows. Each leg was as long as a meter. Murk green, the color of rot. Every limb was armor-plated in a segmented foul caprice, spiked and thorned with long, black, shiny hairs. However, the spidery limbs were not the worst reveal, for as it pulled itself forth from the shadows, all color left my skin, and all my bravery with it. Thundering, my heart almost tore itself from my chest as fear turned my bones and muscles to stone. Before me was not a spider. It had the legs of one, but its body was no acroid. It was a head. The head of a boy. Specifically, the boy from Mrs. Caldwell's photographs. This monstrosity was Henry. Though it appeared like a severed head, the grinning child's appearance had no neck, and out of its head grew these hideous spider legs upon which it scuttled. There was order to their positioning. Some bore out from his crown, others out of his ears or the back of his head. With wicked delight, his pale face spoke not a word from his dirty, blackened mouth. Instead, its poisoned smile opened its jaws wide and revealed hundreds of curved, gray fanged teeth. In a flash, it snapped forward, jumping clean across the room, and when I went to run towards the door, it jumped right in front of me. Fumbling away, I slipped on a puddle of slime, and it scuttled with such swiftness that I damn near died from fright. In the moment, something took over, and I suddenly remember I had my bug spray. Squeezing the trigger, I cast forth a geyser of pesticidal liquid, drenching this thing in it. Henry cursed with screeching and screaming sounds as he struggled, stumbled, and recoiled from me. For a moment, I thought I had beat him, but after sinking beneath the bed, the ugly child shook the fluid off of himself and prepared to attack me once more. Standing up, I raised my spray gun, but this time strings of green gunk spunked out from his eyes and mouth. These pestilent rivers of blight web netting up my spray and canister, sweeping them far up onto the wall beside me. I found myself disarmed and at Henry's mercy. As the spidery child crawled out from beneath his bed, gingerly he stepped, foot by foot, inch by inch, easing himself towards me like a lion, ready to pounce upon some helpless antelope. This time, as he charged forward, mouth chomping with feverish fangs, I jumped aside and he hit a wall instead of me. Seizing the chance, I ran faster than ever before, clearing a few meters between myself and the door. I escaped the room and slammed the wooden barrier shut on his face. Bounding downstairs with no concern their termite-chewed condition, I began calling out for Phil, but he didn't answer. "Phil, come on, man, we have to go." "We have to go now," I cried, and panic sweat running down my head. "I told you not to go into his room," an all too familiar shriek croaked from the corner of the room. Turning my anxious eyes towards his solitary chair in the corner of the living room, I saw Mrs. Caldwell. Shrouded in webs and in cloth, her fingers plaited in a yellowish caprice. "You're just like the rest of the vermin. You're always coming in here trying to move me out or steal my land, upsetting my dear darling Henry," Mrs. Caldwell sneered, her greenish-gray fangs suddenly on display. Emerging from a hole in the wall beside her came the hideous eight-legged head of Henry. At least with the others, Henry wouldn't go hungry, but you denied him even that, choosing to hurt my dear Henry. "That won't be," she said, her voice wobbling into a crickety tone. "Are you going to kill me?" too. You have to tell the rest of the pest out there not to step foot on my property again. That's why I called you. You're to be my messenger. Of course you don't go telling everyone to stay away. Henry and I still get hungry from time to time, she grinned, as she ran her spidery fingers through her son's curly hair. What about Phil? I asked, my feet already edging towards the door. Oh, I'm sorry. I was a little peckish after a long day of shopping. We really was a sweet young man. Mrs. Caldwell smiled, her lips salivating and wide. Without any further words between us, I sprinted and noped straight out of that place. I'm sorry, Phil. Sorry I left you there to be another stain on the wall or a bad smell that just won't go away. But I had to get out of there. I had to tell people, if you get the call to go to that house or you cross paths with anyone named Mrs. Caldwell, don't be fooled by her kind old lady act. She is a monster. And to her, we are vermin.